So welcome everybody back to the Travel Collective, and we have a new episode and some new folks to talk to today. I'm going to ask, today's topics on travel insurance, and then I'm going to ask everybody to introduce themselves and answer one question for that, which is, do you always get travel insurance when you travel? So I'll start with you, Yetunde. Would you introduce yourself and then answer that quick question for us?
So hello, everybody. I'm Yetunde. I am the owner of a culinary travel company called Let's Eat the World. Yeah, we offer tours in France and Spain at the moment. And as far as do I always get travel insurance, I'm going to say not always. It depends. And I will explain a bit more about that later.
Wonderful. April?
Yeah, my name's April. You've met me through the Travel Collective. My website is Fall Photo Trips. And like Yetunde, it's not always. I don't always get travel insurance. So you'll hear more about why and when in the conversation.
Yeah.
Cindy.
Cindy Cohen. I'm with the Travel Collective, and I will say if I travel internationally, I do always get, on every international trip, I do always get travel insurance at my family's request. There are reasons I do that, and I'll talk a little bit about that too. Domestically, it depends, and things change a little bit. Sometimes depends on the trip and how much I'm spending and so forth. So let's just talk about maybe like the types of coverages you look for when you're looking at travel insurance. And so that might open up the question of why you choose to get insurance and why you don't, and then what kind of coverage specifically. There's so many different types of travel coverages out there, and some are probably more important to you personally than others, but it might give people some thoughts on that. So Yetunde, do you want to talk a little bit about why you choose to get travel insurance and what you look for?
Well, I think in the past I wasn't really big on getting travel insurance. I was like, okay, I take the risk. I know I've already mentally invested this money, so whatever happens, happens, and that's it. There were those two very different incidents. I live in Europe, so I've got health coverage that is just part of being a European. And so I don't just generally worry so much about the health insurance part of things, except the one time that we went to the US and my son was like, he was just going to be turning 1. So we were going to US for his first birthday, and he fractured his tibia as we were going down the slide in San Francisco. And so we took him to the emergency room where they did way too many x-rays for such a small human being, to tell us, oh, he's fractured his tibia, you need a cast and so on and so forth, but it'll heal on its own. And they sent me a bill some months later for an amount that just floored me. It's like, for a 1-year-old. So I thought, okay, so maybe we should have had insurance, but anyway, it's the whole thing. But for just, since after COVID and the 2 years that almost 2 years that our companies were closed down because we are in tourism, my last trip that I just went to Thailand, I did get insurance for us just in case.
Yes.
Just because of all the nightmare stories I had heard from friends who had traveled during COVID and were just, screwed. Yeah. Even if they did take insurance, they were still screwed. So it was something that I looked for. So yeah, it depends on where I'm going, and it depends on how much it is. If I'm traveling within Europe, generally I don't, because I'm not paying that much to go wherever it is I'm going. Mm-hmm. But if I'm going to go a really long distance, I'm starting to look at it a bit more than I did in the past.
Yeah. And so I'm going to ask about the COVID insurance. Did you look at, because I know there's different companies offering different packages around that, right? So in case your trip is canceled due to COVID, you could have that, or quarantine insurance. Were those some of the things that you were looking at, Yetunde?
It's kind of, I mean, they're all using all kinds of different language for what they cover, and you have to really, really read the fine print to understand what part of this is okay and not. What we did is that we combined, first of all, we booked with our American Express card, because that would give us some coverage for some things. And then on top of that, I looked for an insurance that was going to cover us mainly. I still wasn't really as much concerned about the COVID part of it because the health insurance that we have is international. But I wanted it to still mention it in any case. It was more for some of the other nightmares that we experience when we travel internationally. I was reading all these stories about people's flights getting canceled and this one not getting their bag there, and then this one. So I was like, okay, let me not take the risk. But I did look at the coverage, since everything that's happened with COVID. But I still think it didn't sway me in one direction or another. I ended up going with an insurance company that I was familiar with in the end anyway.
Which is probably a good option as well, because you've worked with them in the past, so that helps a lot.
Yeah.
And you may know somebody. So April, kind of the same question, like, what makes you decide to get insurance, and what are some of the things you're looking for?
I think now, if I'm going to go internationally, I do get insurance, and I'm looking for, I know going forward, I'll definitely be calling and asking questions like, what does happen if I get injured, or if I had to quarantine, or if I fall and break something, as I recently did in Boston, if it's really bad and I feel like I would want to go back depending on which country I'm going to. Like if I was going to Morocco, there's a language barrier, and just to go into one of their medical facilities, even if they have top-notch people, I might not be comfortable. I might want to find out if my insurance allows me to be, sent back to the United States. I think they call that repatriation, and how much that costs. I think these are things to look at. I'd be concerned about. I do often look at how much to cover, for a lost bag. I know before we got on air today, Cindy, you and I were talking about, you need a receipt, you need the original receipt to prove how much did that camera cost. As old as some of my gear is that I travel with, I do kind of assume some of the risk, but I often now call all of my credit card companies. That's something I take time to do, and specifically ask. Recently, I was at the AAA office, which is here in the United States. That's the Automobile Association. I've had them for years, and they've got a new level of coverage. And the gentleman, when I walked in to get some maps, he's like, hey, it's time for you to renew. Do you want to upgrade to this new level? We've added baggage and travel interruption. And so I was like, So I'm putting in a call to an agent, because you need to ask questions. There's just, the fine print is too daunting. They make it, pages long. And for us as a layperson, sometimes to understand exactly, we need to make sense for us. Like, hey, what is a loss? But is that 24 hours? Is that a week? How long? How much? And find out what they cover. But I might already have some coverages for some things, but I definitely believe if I'm going to go international now, I'm going to be seeking out, especially for medical. Unfortunately, I'm not 20 anymore. So I think it weighs more heavily on us, about things that could happen.
Yeah. And being, from the United States, our health coverage doesn't really cover us past leaving the country. I mean, in some cases, honestly, you need to check to see what your health coverage is out of network, which means out of your neighborhood, out of your state. So in the United States, there are some definite things to be concerned about with health coverage. So for me, that question came when I did my long trip, because there was a lot of concern about my health coverage and my family being concerned about me being abroad. And what happens if you get hurt? And it's like, well, I'll just take care of it in country. It's like, but what if you need to come back? And so I did a lot of research on what repatriation looks like and what situations they'll do it. I did purchase my my travel insurance through World Nomad, and I know some do this where they'll actually not only pay to have you brought home in certain circumstances, but they would also in certain circumstances send a family member to you, which is another option that the insurance covered. So if let's say you got hurt and you need to be in the hospital for 6 weeks or something, if I were in Europe or in a place where their healthcare was at a standard that I felt comfortable with, because there are some countries where you don't feel comfortable with the healthcare that they offer. You might be okay staying there, but in that case, you might not want to be alone, right? You're in a very scary situation. So I never thought that was an option, but I saw that was an option with some of the health coverage, that they'll do both. They'll go both directions for you. So just exploring what my options were. Also, travel insurance doesn't it augments your own current health insurance. So when I traveled for a year in 2016, I had quit work, so I didn't have my work health insurance. So I had to actually purchase some other insurance to have health insurance. So if I did get repatriated, I had some insurance to work with to begin with, as well as whatever they were going to reimburse me for being out of the country. So it's a lot of things to think about, you know, making sure that your health covered when you travel, and what's reimbursable, because some things are reimbursable with your health coverage. Like if you get sick and you need to buy over-the-counter medication, you lose your glasses, do you need dental care? Like there's a lot. I think it depends on how long you were gone. I mean, I was traveling for a year, so I had a lot to think about. Being gone for a couple of weeks, you know, some of those things like dental work or something, you might just have an emergency situation and then have the major thing taken care of when you got home. And losing your glasses or getting prescriptions refilled, like all of the things, your current medical things you need to think about. And I think COVID, I know we talked about some of our other members looking at quarantine insurance, and that's something that I haven't done yet because I haven't traveled abroad since COVID. But I think it will definitely be a thing that I will look into, see if things change. That's what it's all about. Like if you go to a country where today there's not a quarantine rule or what policy, but because we've been up and down in that in the last several months and years, if it changed and then you were required to quarantine as you entered the country all of a sudden, because it changes on a dime, that the insurance would then pay for that hotel, because that's on you, right? So you have to quarantine for 2 weeks. It's like you got to go stay at a hotel for 2 weeks before you're allowed to go on your trip. Who's paying for that, or who's helping you come back? So it's an extra cost for the insurance, but it's an extra safety measure, so you don't feel like your trip now just cost another $1,500 because you had to quarantine. So there's lots of things to think about. I'm glad we're having this conversation, because some people don't think about it's not just trip delay or trip coverage. So okay, we have one more. Well, we were asking like what you look for in your coverage. So maybe we can just talk one last question about how what you're planning to do the next time. I think Yetunde, you kind of went through that, what you did for Thailand. Is there other places you're looking to go, and are you looking to get insurance for those new places as well?
Yeah, we have in the works. We're hoping to do a long-term trip, so quite similar to your 1 year. We're looking at doing like a 1.5 year trip to various destinations. So I know my husband is researching all the different coverage that we have, and we obviously will want. I know my cousin, usually she gets an insurance that covers her for the year, 365 days of the year, international travel insurance. So we'll probably look at something like that. And then we'll need to go into the details to see exactly what they're covering, because it's, we're also traveling with a minor. That's also a little bit different. In some places you might have to see a pediatrician. What kind of specialist would you cover? So we're gonna have to look at that and see if the insurance that we pick, or if we're going to have to get a series of insurances, because maybe they don't cover all the destinations we're going to. So that is, you're making me think. When you started saying that, I was like, oh gosh, I gotta put that on my list.
It's a lot to think about. You're right. I mean, everything from like regular, if you're going to do long term, like your regular, even your checkups, like you need to, and if you wear prescription glasses, or you have dental things, or you have prescriptions, medical, drugs that you use, things that you have to have or need, maybe potentially, how do you handle that in all of the countries you're going, right? So in Western countries, in Europe, in the United States, and in a lot of places, it's pretty simple. It's very similar, but in some countries in the world, their programs are very different, right? So
some countries also will require you to have those things. Like, they don't want you on their dime. They're like, even if they have super healthcare, they're like, okay, you really do need to take care of yourself, because, you're stressing our system if you just show up in there. So it's important to look at it from that perspective as well.
Absolutely. So
I would think, coming into the United States too, just like we were talking about in between states, if your coverage even in the United States may not, you show up at a facility and they look at your card, they may be like, well, we're not going to serve you, we're not going to cover you, we're not going to care for you. I know with my personal insurance, it definitely covers me if I, if I fall in Boston and I live in California, I can pretty much go anywhere out of network and they'll cover,
Emergencies.
yeah, an emergency, ambulance, whatever I need. But again, those are things to look at for international, most definitely, because the
Yeah.
same thing, country to country may vary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, one thing to keep in mind, and I'm not an expert on this, but what I've been told by doctors, for example, is that, and then this is particular for the United States, an emergency room cannot deny you service.
True, they cannot.
So,
Right.
you come in, insurance, not insurance, they've got to take care of you. So if you do have something that happens, don't be afraid to go to the emergency room,
Right.
and get that taken care of.
But I will tell you, as an American, you're better off going, if you can, to an urgent care. It'll be you will get a $10,000 bill from the ER. So if you don't need, like, you're not bleeding, you don't need like urgent, like this very second, like life-threatening. There we go. That's the word that I was looking for. If you don't have a life-threatening thing, going to an urgent care facility where they can see you within an hour, within a few minutes, usually. The cost of that will be hundreds of dollars versus the ER, which will be thousands of dollars. So that definitely is a thing to learn, and something you kind of need to talk about as if you're not familiar with how the healthcare works in the places you're going. It's a lot to think about, and then we don't want to be too daunting. We try not to be too negative about this, but it's something to think about, and especially for somebody who has medical issues that they are already dealing with. I think health insurance and travel insurance is something to consider and put it on your radar. And for you, like Yetunde, where you're doing long term, then it's like, oh, I really should, because it's more likely, the longer I'm gone, the more likely something's going to happen. Yeah, so okay, well, I think we covered this topic pretty well. I forgot to put the timer on, so I don't have any idea how long we've been talking. But thank you, everyone, and thanks Yetunde for joining us in April and talking about travel insurance. And if you have comments or you have experiences with travel insurance, especially someone who's done a claim, we'd really like to talk to somebody who's had a claim that goes through, whatever, good or bad. We'd love to hear more about that and see how that goes. That would be experiences we'd like to share with our travelers. So talk to you all soon.
All right, thank you.
Thanks.